Okay, so welcome to the show, everybody. I had just finished saying that my guest looked amazing, so I think it's time that we actually start this. Welcome to the show. I am pleased to be joined by Matthew Venus today. Hello, Matthew.
Hello, thank you so much for
Hello.
having me.
You're very welcome. You're very welcome. So, for those of you who don't know who Matthew Venus is, and most of you should, at least I hope you do, Matthew Venus, he, them, is a proprietor of the Salem area shop Spiritus Arcanum. And alongside Jacqui Allouise of the Couldron Black is the co-founder of the Salem Witchcraft and Folklore Festival. Venus describes himself as an artist, folk magician, rogue occultist, folkloric witch, social deviant, and beard curator. So Matthew is the co-founder of the festival that I've been promoting, and many of my other guests in the summer series who are going to be actually at that festival presenting have also been talking about it. So it's a pleasure to finally have you on, Matthew. Thank you so much for
Yeah,
coming.
I'm really happy to be here, and yeah, and also to be amongst such good company. So many of, as you said, a lot of your guests are going to be presenting, but also a lot of names that I recognize, a lot of good folks here. So happy
Absolutely,
to be amongst them.
absolutely. And a couple of them are very excited to be listening in on this discussion today. And this is a busy week for you because you have another podcast
I have another. Yeah, I don't. This is I'm a crazy. You know what's funny though is it's one of those when it rains it pours things, and I was literally talking to a friend of mine and something came up about podcasts, and I'm like, no one ever wants me on their podcasts anymore. And like then literally Southern Bramble reached out to me, and I did that with Austin and Marshall, which was
Mhm.
lovely. And then like you reached out, and then also I'm doing this Knights of the Nephilim thing on Thursday too. And I think I have another podcast that I might be doing it within the next month, if not then like in early July. So it's crazy. I don't know why anyone wants to talk to me, but thank you.
That's awesome.
um,
You've got some stuff on your shoulder there. Just shrug it off there, eh?
yeah, yeah, no, but so yeah, so there's that, and then right on Saturday I have this big market that I'm running too.
That's right.
A
Yes.
part
Yeah.
of what we're doing. We can talk about that a little later. I'll do a plug for it. But if anyone's in the Salem, Peabody, like kind of North Shore area of
Mhm.
Massachusetts, we got something going on Saturday. So yeah, very busy week.
Oh,
But you
that's
know,
awesome. That's
I tend to
awesome.
keep myself busy.
Mm. Well, okay. Well, let me start out with that then, because we were talking briefly about in-person events beforehand. We can get into that later on. But I
Mhm.
am curious because, I'm not going to ask you about Salem, but I am curious about for you as both a proprietor of a shop and also an organizer of events. What is it like for you to be doing events in person now, especially after the pandemic when everything had to go virtual? What's that been like for you?
I think it's really it's nice.
Mm,
It's fascinating to me because like I've kind of gotten back into like the swing of vending and things like that more so
mm,
because I opened up my physical shop. So we're coming up on a year here in July. So I just opened it up this previous July. Before that, Spiritus Arcanum, we've been around for over a decade now, but all that time it's been online and
mm.
vending events and things like that. So just got back into doing the vending stuff within like the last year. I want to say like last June, probably I jumped back in, felt like it was time, to kind of start doing a little bit more of that. And it's really amazing and really wonderful. And it's crazy because you see people that you haven't seen in a few years, but it doesn't feel like that. It's, the blurry years, right? Of like 2000 to like 2022-ish, maybe. So there's that. I mean, I'm really enjoying it. It's really nice. I feel like, we've gotten to a place where people are starting to kind of reacclimate a little bit, but I still think that, um, I see it every day, like in people that I know and just online and just in communities too. People are still reacclimating. It's surprising, I think, to see how there are still, the like we're still affected by what
Okay.
happened in the COVID years, and it wasn't just COVID, right? It
Yes.
wasn't it wasn't just lockdown. It was everything else that was going on, like sociopolitically,
Mm,
worldwide, and whatever. And I mean, we are still, I think, fairly regularly hit with like global traumas on an almost weekly basis if you pay attention to the news. So
yes.
everyone's still, I think, kind of waiting in and wanting to feel some sense of community and normalcy, and I think that's great. But I always try and remind myself, especially if I have interactions or social interactions with people that feel a little weird, that like that's okay. We're we're still trying
Yes.
to like, navigate all of this. But in general, it's been really nice. I love how close I've actually been able to connect with people during pandemic and quarantine years. I made some really good friends online, that I don't know if I necessarily would have if we weren't all in those
Right.
situations. Really wonderful students that have become friends, all sorts of things. And that's been wonderful, but I also love the in-person community and in-person interactions. So it's really, it's nice to be getting back to that and seeing some of the familiar faces and meeting new people.
Mm,
So yeah, yeah, I'm
absolutely.
not mad about it. Yeah.
Absolutely, no, absolutely, yeah. And it's an interesting thing too. At least I've noticed, and some of the people I know have noticed that the pandemic seemed to have like that time away. It seems like the quality of in-person events has just gone up. Maybe it's because people have been away and they kind of maybe pseudo forgot what an in-person event was like versus, being on a screen constantly, like, zoning out and being in your own environment. Have you noticed that with some of the events you've been going to?
Well, so I mean, most of the events that I've gone to have been vending events, right? And so I mean, generally they've been pretty good. Like the ones that I've gone to generally have always been fairly good. There's one that I do every year that's put on by the Black Veil, which is like tattoo artistry, and Matt and Ryan Murray, who are incredibly talented,
Mm,
brilliant artists, beautiful, like aesthetic on point. They do an event called the Salem Night Fair that's every year. It's the last 2 weekends leading up to Halloween. And that event, if anyone's coming to Salem or in the area at that time of year, like it's absolutely not to be missed. And just the caliber of that, because I think it was like coming back, has been, I mean, it was already great, but it was stellar this last year. Because it's not just a market, it's like literally this immersive event that they put on with performers and really kind of living artistry happening there. So that's probably one of the highlights that I can think of that I went to that I felt like was just like next level. Um, Unfortunately, and I've talked to a few people about this, unfortunately, I really haven't done that many um, like occult or pagan conferencey type of events
mhm.
in person. That'll change though. I'm going to VGS, Virtus Genii Symposium in Olympia, Washington. It's put on by
Mm.
Marcus and Katamara.
Oh, yes,
Marcus
okay.
from
Yeah,
Folklore
yeah. Mhm.
and Katamara from Rosarium. So really excited about that. For years,
Mm.
all my other plant nerd friends have told me, oh, you need to go to this, you need to go to this. And this year I'm like, okay, I'm finally going to do it. And I'm going, I'm not vending, I'm not teaching. It's awesome. I'm so excited about that because I honestly can't tell you the last time I went to an event where I wasn't doing one of those two things,
Right.
if not both, usually both. And I love doing all of that, but I also kind of miss just going to events and conferences for the sake of just going and being in that community. So I'm very much looking forward to that.
And that one in particular, I've seen things posted on by Marcus online. I mean, first of all, Marcus is amazing. I only know him online, but everything he's ever talked to me about or like posted, it just looks amazing. And that deep sense of connection with his craft, right? So
Yeah.
that's exciting. I'm kind of jealous, not gonna lie, that you're going to that. That's cool.
I am excited to meet both him and Katamara. I haven't met either of them in person. We've interacted a lot for years online. We've known each other, and I have a great admiration for their skill and their craft and the things that they're. I mean, we're into adjacent things, so that's always exciting to kind of talk about. And again, yeah, Marcus has become truly a master of his craft
Mm,
and what he's doing, and it's been really cool and interesting watching that evolution over the years.
mm.
And now he's getting into like bronze casting, which like I don't know,
I
I
saw
like
that.
seeing magical artists and occult artists and watching their journeys and watching them grow and also expand into new areas. That's exciting for me as an occult artist to kind of also watch and see other people doing that stuff. It's inspiring, really.
That's how it should be. People inspiring each other to deepen
Hopefully,
what they're doing exactly. Yeah. Well,
right.
let's go a little deeper. Let's go a little bit deeper here. Let's go a little personal. I'm going to get my Barbara Walters face on here.
Sure.
So you're an occult artist alongside all of the other things that you do. Tell us a little bit about that. What is it? I mean, obviously, I know I've seen some of your work, but what is it? What are some of your main pieces that you like to work with?
Um, well, so yeah, that's for me. I think sculptural things are some of
Mhm.
my the things that I tend to be drawn towards a lot. But like I'll have my like ADHD hyperfixations on certain things where I'm like gonna get really into like needle felting or like watercolor or whatever. And because I'm really enjoying ceramics and working with clay a lot recently. But because of that, it gives me a diversity of skills, right? So mixed media type of things. I like beading and doing jewelry making. I like, but sculpture has always been kind of a big part of it. And for me, it's such a massive part of kind of the way that I feel like I express my practice, and particularly from more of this like animist perspective of like making spirit houses, making inspirited objects, making fetish objects. Where for me, it's hard for me to fully differentiate like a line between like what is my magical or spiritual practice and what is my artistry, right?
Mhm.
Uh, so I'm actually really excited because I finally gotten to get back into like the clay studio and doing things, because for the past year I've been so busy with like having opened the shop and everything that honestly I feel like a lot of my own personal artistry has kind of been put on the back burner,
Absolutely.
which I feel like is kind of unfortunate because I feel like that's one of the things that like kind of built up Spiritus Arcanum. That was one of the
Mm.
unique things that like, set it apart because it was like what I was doing at least. Um, and so I'm happy to be getting back to more of that stuff because I have a lot of ideas and plans for the futures of things to kind of bring forth because that's what gets me excited, right? That's what keeps me, as opposed to like I don't want to fall into a routine of like doing the
Yes.
same thing
Yes.
over and over and over again. And I also don't just want to be like a reseller. Like having a
Absolutely.
shop that you need to fill with stuff, you have to buy things to kind of resell. I can't make everything in the shop as much as I might like, in my heart wish that I could. I'm only one person. But I
Absolutely.
also, yeah, I make incenses and oils and other apothecary items. And for me, that falls very much kind of in that
Into
similar
your.
range of
Mhm.
things too. And a
Absolutely.
lot of that was really the heart of what built, what I'm doing for
Mhm.
vocation now. Is that, the just the desire to create has always been so like deep within me. I'm just one of those people that I don't know, it'll be 11 o'clock at night or 2 in the morning, and I'll just get this flash of inspiration and be like, okay, this thing has to be made, and ride that out. Um, it's just one of those things. I guess I don't really, it's one of the times that I feel the most connected, if you will, to like my practice, to the spirits, to all of these things, is when I'm in that moment of making that, in that moment of creation. It's a bit, it's a bit godlike, right? And, bring something into existence that wasn't here before.
Absolutely. It's also very, very, very animistic, the way you just described that. So
Yeah.
I'm curious with that. We can talk more about your traditional witchcraft and your approach, but I'm curious with that. My background, I've been involved with Lakumi and
Oh,
Spiritus
okay.
Atcanum.
Yeah.
So like even just as an uninitiated person, I understand some of those pieces. So
Yeah.
I'm curious with that. When you're in the process, and I've seen some of the pieces you worked on this week, the beautiful horned deity statues or spirit statues. I'm curious with that, are you creating the form for a spirit that's coming to you? Are you creating some sort of an egregore, a spirit, or what's happening for you? If you feel comfortable talking a little bit more about that.
Yeah, no, it for me it can happen in a multitude of ways, right? Sometimes it's the process of letting it come to you through the
Mm.
making, right? So without a set agenda, like letting something manifest itself as it's coming through, right? So you might have it, like I may have an intention or something I'm seeking. I may not. It may literally be that like I have a lump of clay or some other items in front of me, and I let those pieces come together and let it, through the process of becoming, reveal itself to me, right? And then after that is all done, I can kind of decide, okay, well, what elements of this do we further want to like kind of task to work and awaken, and fully consecrate into it if we're going to go that far. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. Sometimes it's a form that I'm crafting, that's then meant to be passed along to someone else to do the inspiriting and souling and all of that, right?
Makes
Um,
sense.
but and so sometimes it is that I walk in with an agenda, like, no, I'm creating a spirit house for this type of a spirit, or for this type of a familiar spirit, or to be an icon of a particular spirit or perhaps deity. I don't tend to utilize the term deity, but like I no hate on it. It just, I feel like spirit works just as well.
Absolutely.
There's many different
Absolutely.
types of spirits. So sometimes it is, sometimes it's going in with an agenda, like, no, I have this idea. Sometimes it is the inspiration that literally a flash or an image of like this thing comes to me and wants to be born, and I'm like, all right, let's do this. And other times that's just I'm allowing myself to be in the creative process, and I don't know what it's going to look like until it's done. But through that process, I also kind of get to know what this is, what this being is kind of meant to be, what this spirit is meant to be. And then I can also determine whether or not I'm going to take it that next step further and actually put it to task, and actually, because to me, the body can be left kind of inert. It's like, okay, you've inspired me to the point of the body, but like, if you've had exposure to Lukumi, like there are certain things that turn, you know,
Absolutely.
a lump of cement or a stone into something other than a lump of cement or a stone,
Hmm.
right? And so there's a line there, right? So
Absolutely.
something could just be a form that's lovely, and that's great too. But then there's also the process of you know, consecrating, feeding, enlivening, all of that. That then that's kind of more of an official pacting of a spirit. But then there's more responsibility with that. So you know,
Totally. Totally.
um, there's a lot of, it's kind of variable. But that's part of what I love about it, right? Is that sometimes, and almost never, um, does something come out exactly the way that I envisioned it, like
Mhm.
in my head. It's very rare that I envision something in my head and it comes out looking exactly or being exactly what I thought it was going to. But I kind of love that
Mm,
about it, right? Um,
that's an important part of the process too, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
not being too terribly attached, I think, to
Mhm.
things sometimes, like allowing things to come forth in ways which aren't expected, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, well, I have a million questions on that, but I think we'll leave some of those
Sure.
questions to another conversation. But I'm curious now. I don't think most of my listeners, especially my listeners in the UK who've never been to Salem, who may have no idea who you are, which I know doesn't go well for your ego, but
No, no, that's fine. I'm surprised anyone knows who I am. So, yeah, that's great.
I have no idea who I am half the time either. So I'm curious, because I mean, traditional witchcraft and kind of that folkloric animistic approach is relatively a recent trend in the community, at least from my perspective. I don't know if you agree with that, but I'm curious your evolution. Then, where did you start on your path, and how did you get to where you are now?
Well, I started, well, so I started, well, I guess, you know, and I feel like many people, I was always kind of drawn towards, many people that are in magic, always kind of drawn towards magical things, quote unquote, magical things. But for me, that was oftentimes nature, and really just kind of really thoroughly immersing myself in and engaging with just being around nature and the spirits of nature, both the incarnate and disincarnate. And always feeling a sense of kind of community when I was out in the wild, was a big thing. But also, given an opportunity to play any kind of like make believe character, I was always some kind of a wizard or witch or whatever. And so, imagine my surprise when I was probably like 11 or 12 years old and found a book in my school library actually, that talked about witches and
Mm,
witch trials and the history of that. And it was largely about you know, talking about witches from like a medieval kind of perspective, right?
mhm.
Kissing the devil's back quarters, etc. You know, and those types of approaches. But I was really surprised, and I'm like, wait, so witches are real? Like I just thought it was like literally something that, you know, was just made up. Um, and so that was a shocker to me. And I'm like, okay, so if witches did exist, then witches can exist and witchcraft can exist, right? So I just kind of took a little bit of that book as like my jump off point
That's
to kind of fuck
interesting.
around and start finding out. And did a little bit. But it wasn't until I found, then I randomly happened, like literally, to me, this feels like this happened within weeks of each other, because I feel like I went to the bookstore and saw like Laurie Cabot's Power of the Witch book, which was like one of the few books that was out, you know, at like bookstores around that time period. Like the occult section was like maybe 30 books, you know,
Mm,
the witchcraft occult section was maybe the same 30 books in every bookstore that I tended to go into.
mm,
Um, and so there was that, and then like Cunningham and whatever, and you know, which, like, you know, if people have their criticisms of Cunningham, understandably so, but like for a 12-year-old kid that's like just getting started out, that made things feel a little bit more approachable. So for a while I piddled around and like was, I would say, you know, you're very classic teenage, like 90s eclectic Wiccan, right? Because I mean that was largely what I had access to as far as any type of information as far as how one did witchcraft or magic. Otherwise it was very much like ceremonial stuff that was
Okay.
like more Golden Dawn, but not really,
Mm.
that wasn't really for me. Like I think the grimoires are great. I'm not really so much into like Victorian era ceremonialist stuff onward. Again, no hate on anyone that does. It
No,
just
no, totally not.
doesn't
No, no,
connect
no.
for me in the same way. And it wasn't really until I would say really probably my early 20s that then I first started coming across like tradcraft and like being like, okay, so this has more of the feel and the flavor of kind of what drew me in a lot of ways to witchcraft when I first started hearing about it, right? And so, in particularly, I feel like an actual focus on working with the land, and an actual focus on working with spirits, things that I
Mhm.
didn't really feel. I feel like much of Wicca, and I even hate the fact that that was even called that then, because now when I think of Wicca, I think of like British traditional initiatory Wicca, right?
Absolutely.
And I
Yes.
think otherwise it just needs to be referred to as like neo Wicca or eclectic Wicca, just to differentiate it. Um, or just witchcraft, or eclectic
Mhm.
witchcraft, which there's nothing wrong with that. But for me, I just found much more in common with like the hallmarks that I see associated with like tradcraft, traditional witchcraft, folkloric witchcraft. I tend to use the terminology folkloric witchcraft even more now. Thank you, Aaron Oberon,
Yes.
for that terminology. But in part because I'm not a part of, at least I am a part of certain spiritual traditions that I don't talk about publicly generally, but I'm not a
Yes.
part of a traditional witchcraft tradition.
Right.
Um,
Right. Right.
and
Right.
so in part of it is because we all know how lovely and non-dusty and fuddy-duddy some of the old trad crafters can be. So they'll literally, so many times when people are like, oh, well, what tradition then? Or you'll get it from Wiccans too. And so for me, I think folkloric craft for me is a good descriptor because it
Mm.
defines a little bit more of kind of what I'm doing. But my craft is land-based, it's animist,
Absolutely.
it is based on history, it's based on folklore. And that's a part of, I have a multifaceted magical practice, as I think many of us probably do.
Mm.
But as far as you know, a large part of how I tend to focus upon my craft now, it really started evolving, and that was coming into contact with things like a lot of the things that used to be published through Koppelband, so like the work of like Nigel Jackson, Nigel Pearson, all the Nigels, Nigel
All the
Tennant,
Nigels. Yes.
and then leading into like Chumley and Schulke and a lot of those other folks. And then, so I do think that like really it's kind of a maybe tradcraft in the way that we tend to see it now, if we're not talking like Cochranian and all of that type of stuff, right?
Absolutely.
Um,
Yeah.
really gets into an interesting place like early 2000s, probably maybe 90s, but that's largely because of online communities and things like that as well.
It's a thing.
Um,
Yeah.
so that tends to be a little bit of like where I'm at. My witchcraft is largely based upon working with spirits, and so that's spirits of the dead, spirits of the land, spirits that we're never human and probably never will be. But largely, it's about connecting with, contracting with, pacting with spirits in various forms. And so, yes, so the animist piece of it. So the spirit house, the fetish objects, the working with spirits to empower things, and lend their hand in the crafting of things is huge for the way that I tend to connect to my craft. And again, it's not an admonition about how anyone else. It's strange being a shop owner because so many people that I meet on a daily basis are very much like largely educated by like YouTube and TikTok, because like no one reads anymore these
No,
darn
no, not at all. No, no, no.
but so it's interesting because sometimes, and I talked about this a little bit on the Southern Bramble thing too, so I won't harp on it too much. But I do think we're at a point right now where it's unfortunate in this current era of like witchcraft boom, like particularly I would call it like pandemic era, because like what that really took off, and largely through TikTok. And I'm like, I think it's because everyone was looking for meaning, everyone was looking for some sense of control,
Absolutely. Hmm.
some sense of power, and unfortunately, a lot of when you take the entire beauty, diversity, richness, mythos, magic, power that exists within the craft and are trying to reduce it to 30-second clips
It's not possible.
that have
It's yeah,
no nuance whatsoever, no depth whatsoever,
absolutely.
and you're putting it out there as just for consumption,
Yeah.
content. this is why, like, I kind of feel bad because I feel like sometimes I should maybe try and do more educational things on my social media channels. But I don't know. I'm like, no, show up for a class with me. Like, sit down for 2 hours with me. We can talk about this. And even then, I'll feel like we just scratched the surface.
That's the thing.
You know, but because of that, it becomes very much, I think this current witchcraft wave of modern witches, it has become very much capitalist and very much materialist.
I totally agree.
Fortunately, is missing out on a lot of part. And I don't mean to say that of everyone, and I know I'm making my own assumptions about people's practices, but it's also somewhat based upon like the average person that I see coming in who is interested in witchcraft, and but like doesn't necessarily seem to have a whole lot of depth beyond like, I need to buy this crystal and put it in my pocket because it does this thing, or I need to burn this thing because it does this thing. The thing is magic. I bought the thing, now I am magic, you know. And there's certain arguments for that in various cultures. There's always an exchange. There is always an exchange that occurs in things, and it should. But I think that, you know, sometimes it's interesting to see as someone who runs a business in a retail space now, even more so now that it's like in person and random people might come stumbling in. My hope is that maybe I can make some suggestions to people or point them in to a book or two, or like make some good suggestions that hopefully will inspire them to come back and maybe take things a little bit deeper next time, and maybe a little bit deeper, maybe take some classes, seek out things a little bit further, because we all start somewhere. And I have to honor that, you know what I mean? And when we come from a capitalist, materialist, largely, you know, largely Christianized kind of, regardless of whether or not people are actively engaging in the church, the morality and the ethics and like the kind of worldview of much of the Western space in the United States is still very Christianized, right? So it's a process for people that they have to come through.
It's a process.
So I try not to be too much of a fucking curmudgeon about it, you know.
but I think what you said is valid, at least, and I think that goes back even further than the pandemic. But the pandemic made it worse. You know, I've been part of a community for 20 years. Like I started, my teenagehood was early 2000s. So you know, I was a product of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and then it was, you know, like Pagan Space and Witchfox in that era, right? So people were still connecting online, but we didn't have the same like huge amount of content. And I think that what you said about that 30 seconds, the 30 seconds gets people's attention, but if they're only listening to 30 seconds, then it's, you know, but I think it's also where people find themselves too. Like a lot of the, you know, I made a post on this on somebody's wall. I can't think who it was. Somebody had posted something about I can't even think who it was now, but anyways, it was along the lines of you know, communities within witchcraft, right? Especially specifically like traditional witchcraft and more folkloric witchcraft. And somebody had said that there needed to, David Byrne, that's who it was. David Byrne posted some pictures of a photographic essay on female folkloric witches a couple of days ago, and I had posted on there. I think that it's often a case because the whole topic was around erasure of straight male folkloric witches, which I know they're out there. I know some of them are out there, but for me, you know, the majority of witches in traditional and folkloric craft are all queer. Like the vast majority of them. Some straight women there too, but the majority of them are all queer. And I think it comes down to lenses where people find themselves. So with TikTok, I think the benefit of that is that people are finding their content creators who are just like them, and then creating little communities and constellations. I think the trouble with that is that it becomes very inward focusing. Certain individuals suddenly have voice, and then it's just them. But I think it's where people find themselves. But you're absolutely right. It's a process, right?
I think that's that's a really good point, because the thing of it is that I've noticed on like, and this is part of why I'm like really not on TikTok anymore, because I'm like, oh, but certain individuals they could be living totally in like rural Iowa or whatever, right? Suddenly find themselves with a voice and a platform and whatever, and a following. But then the part of not being a part of a larger community where you're held accountable, also I've seen breed some really messed up behaviors amongst those people, because now all of a sudden you're someone who has power, and you have oftentimes a monetary tied to this, like literally, like people are making money. This could be you know, if you get a big enough following, that becomes, you know, you're a content creator, So now they have a stake in the game as far as what their followers believe or don't believe. So now all of a sudden, if there's someone who's giving a contradictory idea or message
Yes.
about something having to do with the craft, well, now there's like you have stake in the game and you feel like you need to further. Like I've just seen some things devolve into like, I mean, really gross forms of like witch wars, which we always had, but like
Totally.
TikTok gets crazy, like people doxing each other, like crazy things that I've seen. Not necessarily, and this is, and the thing of it is all these people that I've seen generally engaging in this stuff on those spaces are people I'm like, who the fuck
Who
are
are
you?
you?
Like
Yeah,
I don't
who
know who
are
any
you?
of these people are. Like, and that's one of the things that's the weirdest part for me is like I feel like most people I tend to know, or at least adjacently would know. So I could ask a friend and be like, "Oh, do you know who this person is?" Like I've not really heard of them before. Um, and so, but it's its own
Mhm,
world, and people get very um protective when they
mhm.
feel like, especially if it's a newly acquired platform and they feel like that might be shaky, and now all of a sudden kind of livelihood is connected to it, but also ego. And that can become strange things. I mean, that happens in the witchcraft community, period.
Totally.
Particularly when we involve, capital.
Absolutely.
I feel like most people that tend to be really hardliners on certain things online or certain behaviors online that I notice, usually there's a certain people
Mhm.
that tend to go around and behave in certain ways, particularly like negging, like kind of the one true wayism about a lot of things, which can be
Absolutely.
true of specific spiritual traditions,
Yes.
and can be somewhat true about specific spiritual tech, about like
Mhm.
what tends to be more specific, more effective than other things. But oftentimes oftentimes when someone is selling you one true wayism, they're the one with the one true way, and there's usually a reason behind that, right?
Absolutely.
And so what it is it's a flex on everyone else. I've got the real. I've got,
Yeah.
the real
I've got
witch
the
way.
true, the
Yeah,
authentic,
the
yeah,
true way,
yeah,
the
yeah,
authentic way.
yeah.
Um, and all those other guys are just bullshit. So
Mm,
come to mama, stay with me. You can trust me. Give me your
mm,
attention. Give me your support. Give me your money. And for me,
meanwhile,
I mean, I've been around it enough that like that stuff just gets really old.
totally.
But it's honestly, I mean, that's a game that people have been playing since there were, cunning folk and conjure folk back in the
Totally.
day. Always
Yeah.
like that man's doing things wrong, or he's going to mess
Mhm.
you up. I got the real. And there's the thing, there's a difference between communities holding people accountable and warning people about dangerous people, right?
Totally.
And also one true wayism as a flex. That
Yeah.
usually there's a pretty clear motive behind it. Rarely do I see people behaving that way who don't own a magical business or function in some way as like a priest, a teacher, or
Mhm.
or an author or something
Very
in
much
some
so.
way.
No, very
I,
much
I
so. I
rarely
was
see
going to
people who are
say,
just practitioners behaving in that way online.
oh, completely. And
I said I
I,
wasn't going to talk about drama, but I'm like kind of skirting around it. And this isn't even about like any individual. This is
no,
just
no,
the
no, no, no,
habits
no,
that
no,
one
no,
can note
no,
when they're online and in those
no.
spaces that are always unfortunate. Anyway, what
Well,
was
and it's interesting because like I'm moving back to the UK next year. This is kind of my life journey, and a lot of people who follow me know this. But it's interesting to see the cultural dimensions there because like that physicality piece, coming back to that physicality piece, there's a lot more checks and balances when people are closer together. If we look at
yes,
ATRs, right? You go to Cuba and you go to any kind of, Lukumi community or Palo community in Cuba or Brazil or anywhere,
yeah,
right? You're going to have those checks and balances because that priest is not just a priest. He or she is also your great auntie or this, that, and all the other, and there's those familial connections. So you can't just go and do whatever you want because it's part, like, in the culture, in the lifestyle, in the tradition, it's all
right.
built in those checks and balances. Same in the
Well, when you're
UK.
part of, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, no, no. It's so, well, the same in the UK. Like, people say, yeah, there's a lot of witch drama over in the UK too, but it's a lot
Right.
more different. It's different from the drama that happens in the US because over there in the UK, everybody is somebody. Everybody has been drinking with each other. Everybody is like, like, because people are so much close together. Over in the United States and Canada, you know, one person on the East Coast can start, saying, "Oh, I'm the only true way," blah 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 blah, because of this, that, and all the other. Don't go to this person because he's an asshole, blah 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 blah. And because of the vast distances, there's no sense of decorum because of that. And I think it's interesting culturally why that is.
Yeah, I think there's definitely something to that. And I mean, just kind of to your point earlier, Yeah, when we're talking about like actual lineage spiritual traditions, like
Mhm.
that's the other thing, is you're not just accountable to um yourself, right? And your followers. No, you're accountable to like your godparent. You're
Mhm.
accountable to an entire lineage and to Eli and everyone that's in that community, because those traditions do not exist in a vacuum. Like they're not solitary things. They are community traditions, and so you need to show up and take part in, but you also have a responsibility to it. I think that within modern Western, particularly American witchery, if you will, it's highly individualized.
Yes.
Very much about the individual. Even more so, and that's why I think that we see fewer and fewer and fewer actual people engaging in any type of witchcraft traditions, where they have elders that they may have to answer to, which I understand that. I mean, also
Mhm.
just knowing some of the history of a lot of American witchcraft, and not just modern witchcraft,
Mhm.
and particularly high priests, priestesses, and behaviors from like the 70s onward,
Yes.
where everyone wanted to call themselves Lord and Lady, and because they went to basically the extent of a weekend intensive, now they're an elder, and some of them absolutely abused that power, and because of that, that
Absolutely.
friendship lost. I think also in America, we do have such a hyper individualism kind of perspective on
Mm.
things, and no one really wants to answer to their own, elders in any form. So why are they going to adopt elders? I think that we're shooting ourselves in the foot sometimes, but also we don't have a good format for that, which like also just what you're saying, I'm not saying that, but I think that for those of us who've had exposure to African traditional religions, that exists with like, actual elders and have
Mhm.
elders that are truly respectable people and respected in the community and known in the community, that have long lineages and that function as a community where shit doesn't get done unless you show up and work.
Mhm.
Like you show up and work, and that's how you learn. You know what I mean? You're not just taught because you're entitled to it or whatever. No, you show up and work, and that's how you learn.
Mhm.
It's a very different model, and I think unfortunately, it's something that I think much of like neo-paganism and like much of maybe certain elements of witchcraft could stand to have more of, but we don't have a good model for it, and so oftentimes it does devolve into like ego and
Mhm.
abuse. And that's what the stories that we heard that came out of like some of the things from like the 70s onward, and things got a
Yeah.
little bit messy. And also if you're engaging in sexual behaviors with initiates, that is ultimately probably going to lead to like, some difficulty, and that's
Absolutely.
hard baked into some of those traditions. And again, it's not a judgment, but
Mhm.
the likelihood increases that you're going to have problems when you involve those types of things. Um,
Totally.
so
Well,
I don't know where that puts us. You know what I mean? I also don't know that I
yeah.
believe in witchcraft I mean, speaking of hyper individualism, I don't know that I believe in witchcraft as a communal pursuit, quite honestly.
Right.
I don't
Right. Right.
true witchcraft. I mean, neo-paganism, neo-Wicca,
Mhm.
eclectic
Mhm.
Wicca, sure, yes. But like true witchcraft, I don't
Mhm.
necessarily
Mhm.
witches may come together for certain reasons and purposes, and you may have small groups, but like congregational witchcraft is not like my thing personally.
Yeah.
But anyways, I'm gonna
Yes.
shut up and let you talk. What were you gonna say?
Well, no, no, no. I think that's a really good, interesting segue because, my experience is, at least, coming from my own journey, is that I'm finding that not only are people who are interested in even like traditional Wicca and traditional witchcraft and folkloric witchcraft, they're looking to ATRs and Espiritismo and even hoodoo to some degree, because that's starting to form more of a community aspect like other ATRs,
Right.
while also practicing witchcraft as a form of personal spirituality or personal practice. I'm curious then, because I mean, I think maybe it's a lens, but it seems like so many of the traditional witchcraft people I know, and who are writing especially, are queer of some kind, right?
Yeah.
And I'm
There are a lot of
curious.
us out there.
There are a lot, yeah. And it's interesting because even though there are queer spaces within ATRs, they're very, I would say, to some degree, Shumari, for example, right? But it seems like there's a cross pollination between those communities, at least in North America, perhaps starting because, you know, ATRs looked cool, people wanted more of that in their practice, and there was a cross, you know, a cultural appropriation with that. But I am curious about that queer element because I've certainly noticed this. Other people have noticed this. I think a large number of people who are coming to the Folklore Festival and speaking are all queer, right?
I would
Which,
say we have a fair number of people that would consider themselves at least queer adjacent that are a part
yeah.
of it. Yeah.
What do you think that is about witchcraft particularly? And you can speak to your own experience with that as a queer person. I hope I didn't out you there, but
Yeah, I think that witchcraft is arguably inherently queer, depending upon how we want to define queer, right?
yeah.
I think it's inherently other. I think that, and again, I mean, I just want to double back to something I just said earlier, where I was like, real witchcraft, true witchcraft. That's my opinion. Y'all don't need to like. I'm not trying to. Again, it's never
Disclaimer.
my intention to shit on someone else's practice.
Yeah.
But from where I stand, also, real witchcraft and true witchcraft, as I know it and have experienced it, is inherently queer. It is inherently other. It is, to use an overused analogy, it is living, you know, with one foot in this world and one in the other, to not truly be belonging to one or the other, you know, and that's queer. And so I think that, you know, I found the craft and started practicing magic at the same time that I was figuring out, you know, my own kind of sexuality and whatnot, you know. And I mean, I also, that's a journey, right?
Yeah.
Like these days, I arguably, I mean, like if we really want to worry about a bunch of labels, right? It's like now I can be like, well, I think I'm pansexual, but homoromantic. And even though I don't necessarily care that much about, you know, gender expression, like sure, he, them works, but also I'm not trying to take away from trans experience and body dysmorphia, or full on co-opt non-binary places and spaces, because for me, I've always felt like a mix of genders. Do you know what I mean? And I've also, as a part of my craft, I've always felt like that was the ideal. Like, and that's one of the reasons why I think that really binary models of like certain binary models as they exist in polarity models as they existed in like traditional Wicca and some of those traditions never really jive for me or connected for me, because I feel like as a witch, the goal should be both. Like should be both. Like I shouldn't have, it shouldn't be about whether or not I can connect to the goddess or the feminine or the masculine. The goal should be both, which is why, again, you know, I think for many of us and a lot of people can appreciate the icon of Baphomet. For me, that is the idealized form of the magician and the witch, right? It is the bestial lit aflame by the torch of gnosis, right? It is the quote unquote masculine and feminine in harmony together, right? It is that which is above, it's the and below, it's, you know, the supernal and infernal. It is all of those things, that balance, right? Between our angels and our demons and all of that, and living in that place of paradox and queerness, right? That I think for many of us that are already kind of in a state or a place where we haven't felt like, I never felt like I belonged around like other folks. like I just never really felt like I fit in with like the average person. Most of the things that most people and most normal people in this life tend to like really care about and be concerned about and spend a lot of time and energy on, I don't tend to give a fuck about, and I never really have. Most of the things that like lots of boys were into when I was a kid, and also even girls, I was like, I'm not into any of this stuff. So and that was the thing, is it wasn't even for me that it was like, oh, I don't like boy stuff, I like girl stuff. That might have been a little bit easier, you know what I mean? And at least figuring out, it was always like, no, I like weird stuff. I'm the weird kid. You know what I mean? So even before it was even about any type of a sexual identity for me, or who I was attracted to, you know, I always felt weird. I always felt other. And I mean, part of that was just, I think I valued certain things in different ways than other people around me. I think I maybe saw things in different ways than other people around me. But that just got even deeper when I started recognizing, you know, my own queerness and
right.
my own kind of otherness in that way. So for a very, in that, you know, the thing within that though, and I think that I do credit witchcraft to some extent with this for me, was at a certain point when I was like probably like between like 12 and 14. I was like, you know, I'm never going to be like these other kids. Like, I'm never going to be like these popular kids. I'm never going to be like this jock kid. I'm never going to be like these quote unquote normal kids. Like, but I don't want to be because these people are boring to me. And so what I'm going to be is my fucking self. And I'm not
Yeah.
going to give and I'm not going to give a fuck about what other people think, because I don't really want to be like them anyway. Do you know what I mean? It was like this realization, and I think that in part, like, it was me coming to grips with my own queerness, and also coming into my craft, and claiming the conception of like my own personal agency and power, but also all of the responsibility that comes with that. I'm like, no, my responsibility is to me, right? Not to some dusty old book that says that things should be a certain way, or not towards like what society wants the norm to be, which is so fucking boring. Like,
Yeah,
um I was 12 years old and already just fucking over it. And like,
came into the world already an old
I'm
curmudgeon.
here to slur it up, honey. Like, and so yeah, I mean, for me, there's a lot of that. There is this inherent kind of queerness to things, and so I think it's all of those layers of queer and what queer means, and I think that again, I think that queer is a journey, not a destination, and
Absolutely,
we
absolutely.
should allow ourselves to kind of grow and change over time, and not become so I actually think that not being too beholden in certain identities or labels for ourselves is actually one of the queerest things we can do. It's good,
Totally.
it's good to have, just, this is how I feel about describing my craft to people too, though, is I'm like, these are all just labels that I'm kind of, so we
Yeah.
kind of be in the same ballpark about what we're talking about, but like, we shouldn't be set in our ways, I think,
No,
in any of
it should
it.
be
Like,
more fluid.
be
Absolutely.
open to new things, and be fluid. Like, I feel like
Yeah.
that's queer, that's witchy, that's like,
Yeah.
keep on moving, so yeah,
Okay. Let me ask. Okay,
that's
let me ask you a question on this. This is going to be
yeah,
very, very particular and very specific. But as you were talking just then, it occurred to me that there are so many writers now in witchcraft. It seems like there are two types of writers right now:
yeah.
queers and straight women, and a couple of straight men somewhere in there, right?
Maybe some queer women in there too.
And some queer women in there too. Yes. Um, I'm really curious because the way the direction you were talking there, it was about your own practice, your own way of showing up in the world, the way of showing up as yourself, right? But I couldn't ignore that there are so many people we mutually know who are
Yeah.
facilitators for other people, a lot of straight cishet people, and I'm curious, what is it about the queer experience that prepares you to facilitate for other people? I think maybe facilitate is the wrong word there, but do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think I do. I think here's a part of it.
Mhm.
This is just me spitballing. I think that when you are an individual who has to come to realizations about your own queerness, right?
Mhm.
About the ways that you do not fit into um, the overculture, right? And how you are othered. And it causes a level of introspection. It causes a level of like self-exploration, and truly kind of the knowing of oneself in a lot of ways, right? I think that if you've gotten to a place where you're truly comfortable with yourself in that, I think that is a process of introspection that then also gets applied to one's craft. Um, I honestly don't think, and this is going to sound so weird and elitist, and this isn't in any way. I'm not saying that no one has this capability who isn't queer, but
Disclaimer.
yeah, what I'm saying is that I think that you're forced into this position, and sometimes at a young age, to really start like examining, well, what does this mean? And if this, then that, and then how do I function in this world? And then there's also a certain point where I think a lot of us do come to the point that I was just talking about, where it's like, fuck it, I'm going to be me. And that's
Yes, yes,
really
yes.
a whole thing. But that does require a lot of, I think, reasonable introspection on the part of individuals that I consider to be like really queer. And I think that also informs how introspective they are in examining their craft. So because they've spent that time thinking upon it, preparing upon it, and a lot of people that I know, and this isn't everyone, but a lot of people that I know that are queer, representing within the craft, have been practicing for quite a while too. And there's a little bit of a difference between someone who's kind of in that queer experience where you're already kind of othered, where you're already kind of between these spaces where you already don't fit into society, and you've had to experience that and stand powerful in that, that bringing that to a witchcraft experience, just again, to me, it seems almost like they're very complementary. This is not an experience that like your average cis het woman who is getting into witchcraft later in life because she was put into the status quo model of told like X, Y, and Z is what's going to make you happy. Go do that thing. And then she gets to a certain point in it and realizes, fuck, man, I've been living someone else's dream for way too long. Like there wasn't that grappling of like, you're already out of the dream because you're queer. So for many of us, we had to kind of already grapple with that. And it's almost like, and I feel for a lot of cis het people because they're sold this kind of model of like what normal is, what the roadmap to happiness is. And for some people, yes, getting married and procreating and having money and all of these things might do it for them. But I think what we run into is a lot of people who get to being like in their 30s and onward and are like, fuck, I've been sold a lie and I've spent my life, trying to follow this roadmap. So then they go seeking for deeper meaning. And that could be through witchcraft, that could be through any other channels of things, right? It's a different experience. I am not saying that those voices can't be just as valid. Do you know what I mean?
No, absolutely
but I
not.
think that there is something that the process of it that I think some of those of us who like already from a very early age were witched, we were queer, we were other from a very early age, we did not fit in. And there's a difference between that and being like, I have fit in. I've kind of been living in this world for so long. But now I'm found this to be boring and an illusion or not serving me, so I'm going to try and move over to this world more, as opposed to some folks that have lived here. And this could be any form of queerness, not who you're attracted to or who you're fucking, but also like being neurodivergent. And I'm not saying everyone who's neurodivergent is a magical witch. What I'm saying is that that's a form of queerness too. Being hyper intelligent, being incredibly creative, being just different in any of the myriad ways that people can be different. There is a queerness there. Anything that puts you outside of the status quo, and very visibly so, or very much so where you feel like that you can actually truly be yourself and fit in, right? That's queerness in a lot of ways to me. Do you know what I mean? And
I'm
so
really, really pleased that you said that piece. Sorry, I interrupted you.
no, that's fine. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm really, really pleased that you said that piece there. I think that's very important. I've noticed and I've heard anecdotally from friends that as soon as they came out and they started practicing witchcraft, especially as teenagers, it seems like a very common occurrence. Right. Suddenly all of their friends were looking at them. Oh, can we go shopping and you read my tarot cards? Can you do this for me? Can you teach me? And suddenly a pedestal is formed, right? Now I'm curious what your thoughts are on this question. You spoke a little bit about before coming back to your own craft in creating and especially after going through a business capitalist model of forming a business and right. vending and selling, right? I'm curious.
The daily struggle where I'm like,
money.
Right? Yeah, it is like literally. It's this constant thing, right? Yeah. Where you exist in the machine. But also want to rage against it.
That's the thing, right? That's the thing, right? Like we live in a society where that's necessary. But I'm curious then, as somebody who, first of all, is facilitating, another person's journey in a way, right? You're creating a space where people can come. You're creating opportunities for people to learn, and how do you find the balance for yourself in your own personal practice that's just yours and isn't for other people to view, isn't for that discernment? Where is that discernment for you?
That's such a good question. I love that. That's a really good question because it is something that honestly I've struggled with over the years, right? And especially one who is so busy, right? So it's like running a business, making things, like organizing this, that, and the other, also trying to teach.
Teaching, perhaps,
It's like, where does one have time for their own practice? So I mean, I do have aspects of my practice that very few people know about, that I don't talk about publicly. There is an entire stream of spirit work that I do that's kind of attached to my witchcraft in some ways that I very rarely talk about in any depth with people. There are, as I have also mentioned, I'm a part of other spiritual traditions that I choose not to talk about publicly, and so some of that is like, that's stuff for me. Do you know what I mean? I'm not it's not for me to capitalize on, right? I'm not trying to use any of it as some kind of a clout thing necessarily. It's my work. Do you know what I mean? And so for me, I have to have those spaces that are a little bit divorced, you know. And then there's you know, what I'm doing more publicly and sharing more publicly.
Absolutely.
And most of the folks that have taken like my courses, and because I do multiple different courses
That's true.
online.
You've got one coming up soon, don't you?
Well, I have one that just recently started, which is Foundations of Folk Magic. We just
That's
did our
amazing.
second session of that, which so Foundations of Folk Magic, Foundations of Witchcraft, and then Foundations of Herbcraft. But I think most people that have taken those courses can largely attest that, like, I'm not here to give you a one true way. What I'm here to do is share things that I have found valuable and that I think have been helpful, and give you multiple ways, hopefully, of approaching things, and largely giving you license to kind of fuck around and find out, because it's more important to me that, like, hopefully whatever someone's showing up to sit in front of me to talk about
Totally.
is going to be something that will inspire them towards their own craft, right? As opposed to you mimicking exactly what I do. That's
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
you know, I mean, but so that's why I try and show people multitude of ways of maybe approaching the same thing. Some of those things I have found don't work. Even things I show for other people don't necessarily work super well for me, but I know that they work well for others, which is why I show them. Because what if I show you the way that I really know how to do something is really meaningful to me, and you try it and it just falls totally fucking flat, then it's like, well, are you a failure? Am I a failure? Is the whole system a failure? No, like, different tech is going to work for different people in different ways, and I think it's important that we explore. So I really try and encourage that type of a thing. I don't know. How do we get on this question? What was the question? I just lost myself.
Oh, discernment. How do you discern for
Discernment.
yourself? Yeah, you know.
Yeah.
And I
So,
think you've answered that, but yeah,
yeah,
if you want
yeah.
to continue.
I think as far as the discernment, I think that it's important that for me, because so at this point in my life, almost everyone in my social circle is a magical practitioner of some sort, and or you know, we're involved in similar traditions or whatever. So many people that I know, almost everyone that I know, my entire vocation is this at this point. And so it's everywhere. So there's certain, like,
Yes.
my partner is not into witchcraft at all. It's fucking great. I love it. Literally one of the only people in my life that, like, and so I can be like, oh, this crazy, this and that and the other. He's like, wow, that sounds like some dumb witch drama. I don't get over here and, like, let's watch a dumb movie. That's awesome. So having some little kind of things to separate things out, but also I didn't want every part of what I'm doing to be so enmeshed in it that I feel like, you know, every part of my craft is for public consumption, or somehow
Absolutely.
tied to, like, vocation or capitalist pursuits and things like that. That was a big thing for me. It also allows me to feel like I'm still giving my time to myself to continue to grow, to continue to develop, because I honestly feel like if you're a magical practitioner or a spiritual seeker or whatever you are, or just a human being, once you stop growing and learning and evolving, what the fuck are you doing here anymore? Like, really. So, like, we should allow ourselves that. And it allows me to be a better teacher and be more creative and continue to develop the things that I think are important, to allow myself the time to go and continue to grow and learn. And sometimes it's also even things like taking classes from other people that you know, that I've signed up for various classes over the pandemic. This is one of the reasons why I love doing the festival and things like that, or hosting other teachers, because I love hearing other people talk. And sometimes I'll take classes from people that are talking about stuff that I already know fairly well, but it's so good to, like, one should never become so fucking calcified, right? That we think we can never learn anything more from another person. Like, what are you doing at that point? Because even I could sit down, Ben, you could be teaching about something that I know everything about, but odds are you're going to present it in a way that's unique to you. And there's something that I can learn even from that. It might even just spark a new idea for me in the way that you explain something that we both know very well. That's valuable. And so I think that, like, we shouldn't be so attached to the idea of presenting ourselves as masters or experts, or and most people that behave in that way have a stake in the game and have a motive for it. So remember that we shouldn't be so attached to that we don't allow ourselves to continually be growing, to continually be curious, right? And continually moving in those directions. You're doing yourself a disservice. And that's why sometimes when I do see young witch influencers, right, that are just right out there in the game and, like, publishing right out the gate, and good for them, like, fucking do it. But be okay with looking back 10 years from now and be like, that book I wrote was crap. Like, keep working, keep growing. Don't become attached to being an expert. Become attached to exploring your craft and magic and sharing that with other people from where you stand, and be like, this is my perspective at this point in time. That's awesome. That's great. That's real. That's genuine. And I feel like that's one of the things that I really want to see more of in the future of the craft.
I do too. I really do. Like, I was thinking myself when even a few years ago, I went through a period where, I came into Lukumi, and Lukumi was so different from all the other experiences I had in witchcraft at that point, paganism at that point, mainly because it was all online for me, right? And suddenly I got a big head. Suddenly I'd found the truth. Oh, this is amazing. This is real. Everything else is crap. This is real. And I remember going through that really egotistical phase where suddenly I felt like I had the truth, and this was it, and being very disrespectful to quite a few other people. And now, of course, I cringe having come further along with that. But I remember that insecurity piece, and I think, like you were saying, with these young influencers who suddenly they have an audience, suddenly they are making waves, suddenly they have attention, and they're promoting themselves as I have it all, and they don't. And they're trash talking this person, that person. I remember, and I hate to admit to it, but I'm going to, trash talking Gemma Gary, because I was perceiving that Gemma Gary's stuff was being influential. Of course, me being from the UK and me being a little tiny person from the UK, I'm like, well, me. Meanwhile, Gemma Gary was never promoting herself that way. I think projection was part of that. And
I think that sometimes it's the way that other people were putting Gemma, like being about Gemma.
Exactly, right? Exactly. Well, there was that phase, wasn't there?
Yeah. Nothing that I've ever seen about Gemma are I don't know what just happened there. I lost some light.
Gemma Gary is joining us from Cornwall.
Has entered the chat. Hang on one second. Nothing that I've ever seen about the way that Gemma presents herself has ever felt like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Okay.
But it's how people are taking that stuff up. It's suddenly being like feeling like you found something. This is the truth, and this is who I am. I think that connection between kind of personal insecurity and tradition, and a lot of, I think it's a very young mindset too. I am me.
I think it's a very new mindset, is what I would almost say. Not necessarily young, but hang on, I'm going to try and fiddle with it.
Yeah, for sure, definitely.
But I'll continue waxing, whatever. Oh, shut up. Okay. So, but I think it's funny because I've literally said before that, like, no one knows more about the witchcraft than someone who started studying the craft, especially a young person who started studying the craft like 2 to 5 years ago. Those are the people that like think that they have gotten it down. And I'm like, that is so cool. I hope that you grow up beyond this, because a lot of times they know enough to be dangerous. It's largely, they know enough to feel pretty secure in the things that they do know. They've done enough, like probably maybe have done enough ritual to once or twice have had some good results. Although I don't know their life. Maybe they're doing ritual every week and they're doing amazing things. I don't think that's usually the case, but they've read a lot of books and they know a lot of things. Knowledge and wisdom are very far apart. They're not the same thing. And so, but a lot of people will look up to someone who has knowledge and seems to know what they talk about, especially if they can make those 30-second or whatever kind of nuanced things where it's just like hardline, this is how this is. And I can cite sources because this other person said this. Okay, like cool. But I think that's a very common thing that I think that you see. But hopefully, again, I think I was kind of like that in like probably in my early 20s or whatever, because I knew a lot and I knew a lot. I was a kid in my early 20s and I was surrounded by a lot of people in their 30s and 40s who were newer to the craft than I was. And I knew a lot. And so people would look at you in a certain way and be very impressed that this young person knows so much. And it's very easy to let that affect you in certain ways. I've always, largely though, I've tried in my life to I think humility is super important. I think that one of the easiest ways to get yourself lost in your practice is to let ego delude you. And I think that we all do it. It's a game. It's like, it's a balance game, right? But it's also, you know, and it's how your ego is acting today. Is it telling you that you're garbage today?
Oh, that's the thing,
Telling you
right?
that you're amazing.
Yeah.
Like either way, it can be lying to you. And I'm not saying we need to obliterate the ego, but we need to
Mm.
understand it and how it functions. And this is also an important part of just craft, so that we also know, like, what is the behavior of my own internal dialogue, my own internal
Mm.
balances, my own ego, and also like, when is it spirits moving through me? When is it something else that's
Right.
external that could be affecting this, or are magical forces perhaps impacting what's going on? If we don't have that sense of self, if we don't have that sense of ego, oof, we're missing some things, you know. And I'm not trying to be like everyone should do shadow work, because I don't think that's it. But I think that introspection, there is work that, like, again, knowing oneself. One of my earliest teachers in the craft would always hammer that into us, and I'm like, I think it's you know, one of the best things that you can do is know yourself, because then you know it's not you,
Yeah.
and you know when you're fooling yourself too.
And that's such a long-standing thing. That exact phrase, 3,000 years ago, right
Yeah,
outside the temple of Delphi, right? Know
yeah, yeah,
thyself. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. There's a danger. See, so as a psychotherapist, as somebody who works in therapy, I feel like there can often be a danger in that. And what I particularly love, sorry, I should really clarify that. I think there can be a danger of over psychologizing as
Yes,
opposed to working experientially with that. Shadow work is not just what's going on up here, because up here, the spirits can get in here too. It's about
absolutely.
bridging those two connections. What I love about your folklore festival, kind of segueing to that,
Yeah,
is that you have not only that breadth of humble people. All of your presenters, at least I've experienced them or seen them from a distance as very humble people, but you have a distinction of voices. You have a selection of voices, and I think that experiential piece, moving through that experiential piece, actually doing the practice as opposed to just thinking about it, is really important. Do you want to talk about the folklore festival?
yeah,
I
let's
want
do
to,
that.
yeah,
And
let's talk about the folklore
I
festival.
was just getting very proud, in my own way. I'm continually humbled by every year just the quality of people that we have showing up
Mm.
and that want to be a part of this. And every year, I mean, we say this every year because it's true every year. Every year, deciding like what we're going to even pick is always so hard.
Yes,
We always
I
get
can
so
imagine.
many, and every year we get more and more submissions. So, and this is why I'm like, we need to start thinking about other things, like maybe doing an additional thing at some point. Who knows? But it's really just a wealth of, you know, amazing people, amazing voices. And I think for us, it was the festival itself, the way that so what we're talking about, for those that might not know, is the
Yes.
Salem is the Salem Witchcraft and Folklore Festival. Our website is salemwitchfest.com. And I formed this in conjunction with Jacqui Allouise, who is the owner of the Couldron Black, which is a shop in Salem. I have a shop called Spiritus Arcanum that's just outside of Salem in a town called Peabody. Um, and we we became friends, and we had both kind of felt like nothing really existed like this at the time in Salem. Salem is known for witchcraft and this and that and the other. There's lots of Halloween things to do,
Absolutely.
but there was no festival that was kind of organized specifically around magical education for magical practitioners.
Mhm.
Um, and so we're like, we're known as Witch City. Like, this is a missing piece. This needs to
Mhm.
change. We need to do something about this. So we did the festival as an in-person event when we first started doing it. And that was great. It was awesome the first year, super fun. It was really great meeting some people I had never met in person and spending time with other magical
Nice.
folk and like connecting in those ways. COVID hit, and so then we segued into doing it online. Um, and so because we moved to doing things online, we've been able to kind of expand it in this broader way, right? Where it's become almost more global. And we have, you know, folks this year from all over the world presenting, like Moss Matthew and Brett Hollyhead are both going to
Yep,
be
my boys
presenting.
from Wrexham.
Yeah, yeah. And who else do we have that's like overseas?
You have Craig Spencer.
I don't
Yeah,
know if
let's
we
pull up the list. Let's go.
we should pull up the list. There's so many.
Let's pull up the
And that's
list.
the thing. We actually added an extra day this year because we had so many good submissions. I'm like, let's just add an extra day. Fio Gede Parma is going to
Oh
be there
yes.
from New Zealand. Um, And so the other nice piece about this, though, is that we also have attendees from all over the world that have been able to come
That's
and do
true.
it as
Yes.
part of the online festival.
Mm.
And so with it, we have like 30 plus presentations of people. And literally this year, every presenter I think is only doing one one class because we had so many good submissions. And I'm like, okay, everyone gets one. And it was hard because sometimes, like literally with some presenters, their presentations all sounded so good that we are like, okay, it's between these two. We're just gonna have to flip a coin because I can't do it. And so many great presenters, and it's the first weekend of August, so that is what, the 5th? Let me pull it up. I should know
The
August,
third, fourth,
August
fifth, and
3rd,
sixth week.
4th, 5th, and 6th. Yep.
That's right. Yeah.
So starting Thursday, August 3rd, and goes to the
Mhm.
6th, but all of the classes are live streamed, and they're also recorded.
Yes.
So if you purchase the classes, because you can sign up for individual classes, you can sign up for a day pass, you can sign up for the whole thing.
Mm.
And you would get recordings of the classes, and you have access to them to watch them or rewatch them until the end of 2023. So you have
Wow, that's
multiple,
pretty good. Yeah.
quite a few months after that to kind of watch anything that you might have missed.
Mm.
So yeah, we have like and I mean, there's so many people. I'm trying to think who else. So like, we have Kobe Michael, as we mentioned, Kobe Michael. We have
Kobe
Kelvin,
Michael. We've got Brandon
Brandon
Weston.
Weston,
Yeah.
Sasha Ravich, Katarina Pejovich, Nay Nordmans, Jesse Hathaway Diaz, Dr. Al Cummins, Verlak Feymana, Melissa Roberts, Professor Porterfield. We have Ben Stimson that's going to be there.
Not feeling nervous at all with looking at the list of others now,
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
Josh Williams is herbalist, green magic guy, does awesome stuff. Is another plant animist fella out there. So excited to have him. Yeah, really excited. Just a really good lineup this year. And so it should
the
be.
breadth of presentations as well, it really touching on multiple parts of the traditions. You've got spirit work, you've got herbalism, you've got very particular forms of folkloric craft.
Right.
You've got an amazing panel with let's see here, Brandon Weston, Al Cummins, and Jesse are on that. You've got
Porterfield is a part of that. Is that the folk
and
around
Dr.
find out?
Porterfield, yeah.
That's usually how we close it out when we've done it online, is the folk around and find out panel every year. And so this one I think is the bottle episode, because it's going to be focusing on, they're talking about container spells, which should be fun. So they usually try and do like a theme around it every year for that panel, and it's great.
So with this, something I've always wanted to ask you around this when I was inviting you on the show, because you've got this now international audience, I think, like you were saying before, people in the States, especially people in Salem, it can become a very inward focused, like echo chamber of what people are talking about. Having this broader focus now, people from New Zealand, people from the UK, people from, a person from Canada, and a lot of people from the States, from all over the place. What do you... Last year, let me ask you this. Last year, what did you notice with the feedback of what people were saying, especially those people who were coming from outside of the States? What did people tell you?
I mean, honestly, this sounds whatever. I just feel like we always get really positive feedback. And I think that is, I think part of it is, and part of what I think sets our festival apart, and again, this is in no way meant to be a judgment on anything else. I think a part of what our festival sets it apart is that it is very much folk magic, folklore, and I would say really more folk kind of, or trad witchcraft, but also just looking at a lot of those type of things through those lens. I feel like a lot of our presenters, the festival itself doesn't tend to get into territories that I would consider necessarily particularly like neo-pagan, although there is some, I mean, there is some of that, a little bit of paganism there. I'd actually say it's more based on classical paganism than neo-paganism, and tends not to be more modernistic takes on witchcraft for the most part. I think that there is a thread of folklore, folk magic, history,
academia, a lot of academics showing up.
Like that, there is, I mean, I think that we have some very well-spoken, well-read, and amazing presenters that come through. And And so that's really lovely too. I think it's, I mean, for me, it's also important. I think it's great, and I love having academics here. But I also want to. It's important to me that we have people and we have presentations that also are practical about doing work. Like,
Absolutely.
not just
Absolutely.
exploring things in theory, but also I want to hear from someone who does this and does certain things in their practice, to sharing those ideas. And we have a lot of that. People that
Yeah.
can be very well learned academics, but also in a lot of ways do magic or witchcraft or what have you as a form of vocation, and have the knowledge, but also
Absolutely.
the very much hand-on experience. And that, I mean, honestly, I think we've been truly blessed in the crowd that we've been able to kind of pull together for this. And it's very much it's that whole thing. There's a whole piece for me too, where I think for a really long time, I think it's and this is, I fell into this trap myself. It's really easy to complain about everything you don't like in the world, right? It's not as easy to make the things you want to see in the world. But like,
Absolutely.
shut your damn mouth. Spend less time complaining about what you don't want to see in the world, and less energy on that. If we believe in any type of like focused attachment and things in magic and witchcraft, spend less time on that and more time on making the things you want to see. Find your community, find the space,
Mhm.
like, and create the things you want to see. If you're not seeing it, and if you don't like what you're seeing in the world, put out what you want to see. This is why I started to teach publicly again.
Mhm.
This is part of why I started doing this festival with Jacqui, and all of these things. And I'm not trying to, admonish anyone, but like, examine. I want to see more people being creative. I want to see more people putting what they love into the world, as opposed to us all just bitching about everything that we hate. Which, like, I get it. There's a lot to hate at this current point in time, but we've got to counterbalance that a little bit.
Absolutely.
And especially when it
Absolutely.
comes to like the witchcraft communities, and I know I've had my own criticisms even in our conversation tonight, but I think it's important that that we are creating, that we're putting out the things that we want to see if we're not liking what we're seeing. And so that's a part of what all of this is. But
It's beautiful.
I'm getting all sentimental and whatever with it. But
It's okay. No, I was gonna be Barbara Walters and ask you about that. Like I was gonna ask you what you hope people get out of this. And I think that really answers that question.
yeah, I really hope
Yeah.
that, I mean, because part of the things that we built it around is like conceptions of community and activism and queerness, but also about folklore, about history,
Yes.
about
Yes.
folk magic and all of these kind of focuses, that I hope that it maybe encourages people, it inspires them in different ways to think about their craft in different ways, to explore different realms of practice that maybe they hadn't before, or even just to connect with people and find presenters and teachers
Mhm.
that they might not have heard of anymore. Because I feel like
So,
some of the people that we represent or that show up, it's also important to us to highlight voices that you might not see everywhere. You know what I mean?
absolutely.
Because I feel like, and some of these people are my friends, so I do not
Mhm.
begrudge them. But sometimes when you look at a lot of like neo-pagan festivals and things like that, it's like the same people, always that
Absolutely
are
it is.
showing up and headlining, and
Mhm.
they're great people. No wonder they're given a spot. But there's a lot of great voices out there, and sometimes
Completely.
it's about encouraging new voices to come forward and share what they have to share. And I've gotten to see that over the years with some of our presenters that started off. It was like one of the first classes that they taught. They come back and they teach again because they nailed
Yeah.
it out of the park. And it's sometimes we need to encourage those new voices and highlight new voices. I think
Oh,
that's,
it's so important.
yeah,
I mean, having been around for 20 years and only now just getting to a point where I'm starting to put something out, right?
yeah.
It's completely true. And I've heard horror stories of new presenters. A friend of mine in the UK, I won't say who, but a friend of mine in the UK went to a mid-range conference. There was maybe 7 people speaking, but one of the bigger names in the UK went and completely disrespected my friend. I
Wow.
completely was like put him down and over talked so that my friend wouldn't have enough time for his presentation, and it was completely disrespectful. And I've noticed that the people who get locked in, who aren't interested in hearing other people's voices, like you were saying before, and suddenly it becomes an egotistical thing for them, it stunts the community. And I think this, to kind of get back to what you were saying before and our other conversation, I think that's such an important part of this festival, is that you are including new names as well as more established names, and
Yeah,
and having that bridging point, that connection point, that liminal space, right?
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, really, my
Mhm.
main thing is I just hope that it connects people together,
Yeah.
inspires people, um, and hopefully exposes people to things
Yeah.
or ideas or maybe practices that they haven't been exposed to before,
Mm.
and might not come across. I feel like some of the things that we put out there can be very niche and not necessarily some of the things that you would see at other festivals.
Mhm.
But I kind of like that sometimes. Although it's amazing because sometimes we get submissions that are so niche that I'm like, I think this sounds awesome, and like
Yeah.
Jacqui thinks it sounds awesome, and I'm like, but is everyone like, is this too niche? You know what I mean?
That's the thing,
So
right? Yeah.
so we try and make things still accessible, but we want to present generally some things that you're not going to necessarily find everywhere else. And so because I mean, yeah, that's a big part of it is again trying to put out some things that maybe we're not seeing. Like where is there an opportunity to
Yeah.
create some new stuff and put other things out there for folks.
Well, I'll be honest with you. I've been watching the online ads over the past couple of years. I was watching even when you were in person. I am really looking forward to present at this. I'm really looking forward to listening to some of the other, well, all the others.
Yeah.
And I'm really, really pleased. So if people now the tickets are open for pre-order. If people want
Yep.
to go and buy a ticket, Salem Witch Fest is the best way to go to.
Yeah, salemwitchfest.com. You can find it there. We're also on Instagram at, I think it's just at Salem Witch Fest. I should know these things, but
I'll put all of these down below too. I'll put them in
yeah, okay,
show
cool.
notes too. Yeah.
Yeah. It's not like I run the Instagram or thing. Salem, yeah, just Salem Witch Fest on Instagram. So there's that we have going on. Another little quick plug, I kind of mentioned it earlier, but I think this is coming out like tonight. So there may be people in the area who are able to make this because at the time of recording, it's the 13th, right, of June.
Yep,
So
13th.
this weekend, on the 17th, right? Yeah, again, my dates. Yeah.
The Saturday, right?
Saturday, June 17th, Salem Witch Fest, we're hosting actually an in-person market that's called Midsummer Nights Market that's going to be at Mills 58. It's at Mills 58 in Peabody, which is where my shop is located. And we have a whole area where we're going to have 30 plus presenters. It's all going to be witchcraft wares. It's going to be dark art. It's going to be oddities. It should be a lot of fun. We're going to have we're going to have psychic readers. We're going to have performers. Laura Tempest Zakharoff is actually going to be doing
Oh.
a belly dance performance, which I'm super
Mm.
excited for. It should be a really fun night. So if you're interested in that, you can find out more about that on the Salem Witch Fest website. It just says a Midsummer Night's Market, and there's all the information there. If you happen to be in the New England area and want to come out, there should be a lot of folks, and we have so many great vendors. We have Alchemy Works. If some folks might recognize that name out there, they've been around in the game for a long time, and Phytonosis is going to be there, and a lot of other folks. So I'm really excited for that. And yeah, this is kind of we're looking into branching out and doing kind of more and more little things associated with the festival throughout the year. So, you know, as we were talking a little earlier, Ben, we might we'll probably end up going back to an in-person event eventually, but we'll also probably have some form of online event in addition to. So we're trying to figure out how to keep the best of both worlds, really, really.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Or you just set up a part of your shop in the UK and in Canada and you just do local stuff over there and here, right?
Once I have like my whole like posse of people that I can just, because my ultimate goal and dream is really, really like, so I finally have a shop manager who's awesome for my shop. But it's been, you know, it's been a year since I've opened, and it's great to finally have someone that I feel like I can trust and like walk away, because my time is not best spent behind a register in a store. I've done enough, like literally, I come from retail management before I was doing my own thing. And that's what I did for a day job before I finally decided to quit and do Spiritus Arcanum full time. So I spent enough time behind there, and like my time is better spent like teaching or writing or making, you know. And so in a perfect world someday, maybe I'll have more than one Spiritus Arcanum, you know, location. Who knows? But I want to at least get a bigger one. I want to build up the online a little bit more, and eventually have all of that, like have someone manage all of that so that I can just own and curate things and then pop in. And
Absolutely.
then my retirement plan is just to like have a cabin in the woods with my own ceramic studio and like, you know,
Oh,
occasionally pop out with some sculptural pieces and throw them at the shop and be like, there you go. Because I mean,
really be the Witch of the Woods.
yeah, exactly. Ideally, right? And I mean, I love having it as a space, and I love a lot of elements of it. But like the day to day, I think is just best left to other people. people for
It's
me.
true. It's
Well,
true. It's
it
true.
allows me to explore like what's the next thing, you know what I mean? So maybe we'll go, multinational someday. I don't know.
Maybe. Who knows,
I mean,
right?
I just got through my first year with a physical shop, so I want to take it back, you know. But yeah,
Every single person I've known who's had a physical shop
yeah.
have always said the same thing. There's always scotch underneath the till.
It's a whole, I mean, it's a whole different thing. As someone who had run it, as an online business for so long, it's not like it's not like I wasn't already busy. And then I'm just like, oh, we'll open a brick and mortar shop. It'll be fine. It'll be fun, they said, which it is. I honestly, I'm so happy. That this is, and if you'd even asked me like, a year and a half ago, I would have not even thought that it just kind of happened in this way. I'm so thankful for it. And so, I mean, I love it and I love being there. There's just a lot to do. So
Absolutely.
I'm happy. It's about finding, hopefully, finding people that you can trust. And again, for me, it's one of my greatest joys about being in this place right now is that like I've been able to hire one of my good friends, to be a manager and be able to pay them reasonably well. And they were able to leave a job that they didn't like, and now they're doing something
Oh,
that they
that's
like.
good.
Like, that's awesome. That's what I want to do is, again, that's another part of like community is to hopefully have people around that like we can do this thing together. And then it's not just me doing it.
And so to go back to what you were saying to kind of to end our beautiful conversation, I'm looking at the time here and I've kept you way too long, but to go back to what we were saying before, witchcraft might be a personal pursuit, but really the community that supports that pursuit is important, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
so yeah, there's that, right? I think that
Hmm.
like I feel like really for most magical practitioners, even if you are a witch and you're in a coven or you're a neo-pagan and you're part of some type of larger magical group, and I mean this also exists, I think, in ATRs as well, in
Absolutely.
most spiritual or magical traditions, but there is what we do as like the broader we, right? There's what we do in our coven, our ile, our tradition, our what have you, and as our group, right? And then there's what we do when we're at home in front of our spirits or our altars and whatever. So ultimately, yes, it's a personal relationship with your gods, with your spirits, and whatever. Community can also be great. So again, don't think that I'm begrudging that when I say that I don't think
Yeah.
it's necessary. I think congregational witchcraft, like witchcraft, the way that I view witchcraft, is a little bit strange. But I still love community, and I love being around magical people and sharing notes and geeking out and getting enthused about different things. And like oftentimes someone that I'm friends with will just say something offhand and it like hits like this major point of inspiration for them. Like, oh my God, that totally connected something for me that we weren't even talking about. And so it's amazing to be in community and amongst also so many other people that are truly passionate about what they're doing, regardless of whether or not what we're doing is even the same thing. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
It doesn't need to be the same thing, but it's really wonderful to see other people that are also kind of living in that space of queerness, if you will, or in this world and also in the other world, or that have been there, they've seen some things. It's good to be around other folks going through it and exploring it as well. So yes,
Yes.
yes, the witch alone. Also, yes, the witch and finding the other witches, I guess, if you will.
Mhm.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. I think that really rounds up and encapsulates our discussion today. Matthew, thank you so much for coming on. For listeners, the Salem Witchcraft and Folklore Festival, which starts Thursday, August 3rd to Sunday, August 6th, is happening. You can go to salemwitchfest.com. That'll be down in the bottom in the show notes. Go and look through the list of presenters, learn more about Matthew and their shop, and join us next week when I have my friend Hungan James from Nova Scotia who's going to come on and not only talk about voodoo, but talk about his own spiritual journey from Wicca, Gardnerian Wicca to voodoo, and to talk about a huge part of his spiritual evolution. He just got married to a Loa.
Oh, wow. Okay, cool. Yeah.
So that's exciting. Matthew, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.